Today we're brushing off the dust of forgotten tales and plunging into the core of these unsettling events. Welcome to another episode of Unfolding History, where we dissect the past to comprehend the complexities of our present. Today we're unraveling the gruesome events of the Jamestown Massacre of 1622. It's March 1622. An Algonquin man from the Powhatan Confederacy visited Richard Pace in Jamestown, an English settlement in Virginia. The man had an important message for Pace. An attack was imminent, and the people of Jamestown were to prepare by arming themselves. The indigenous man was risking his life making this information known to Pace. The news of the attack was shared by Pace with the settlers of Jamestown. However, not everyone that's a colonist in the Jamestown region is informed of what is about to happen. Located along the James River in Virginia, Jamestown in 1622 was a profitable settlement for the English. It was at one time on the brink of disaster, but it somehow flourished against all odds. Tobacco was grown, and it had made certain people wealthy. Demand was high, and the planting of tobacco led to the soil being depleted of important nutrients for proper crop growing. Settlers have decided to take more land to grow their cash crop, which belongs to the Powhatan Confederacy. Also, Jamestown has attracted more people from England to settle in the region to make money from tobacco. This is one of numerous issues that the Powhatan have had with the English since they arrived some 13 years earlier. The relationship between the two groups has ranged from peaceful to violent. On March 22nd, 1622, Powhatan warriors appeared at the homes of English colonists living near Jamestown in Virginia. The warriors are known to the locals and inform the English colonists that they have stopped by the homes to offer food or to seek a trade. The offer seemed legitimate and hard to pass up, so the Powhatan were brought into the homes. However, it was all a carefully crafted ruse. The Powhatan arrived at the homes unarmed, which may have eased the minds of the colonists. When they walked into the homes, some were offered food or drink. When the English were comfortable and their backs were turned, the Powhatan launched a ferocious attack. Weapons and heavy objects in the home were used against the English. No one was spared in the homes. Men, women, and children were killed. These attacks happened so quickly that the victims had no idea what happened. The Powhatan then set homes on fire, and chaos ensued in eastern Virginia. Years of frustration with the English had reached a boiling point, and the Powhatan showed no mercy. Conflicts had occurred in the past, but they had been resolved. This attack by the Powhatan was intended to be a final message to the English colonists on their land. The Powhatan would soon learn a hard lesson from the English following the incident known as the Jamestown Massacre of 1622. Beginning in the 15th century, European exploration of the New World revealed vast lands with valuable resources. Countries like Spain and Portugal were reaping the rewards early. Gold and silver steadily flowed in that other countries became jealous and followed their lead. There were people eager to be wealthy and made the gamble to establish colonies in the New World. Others made the voyage for religious reasons, as Europe was divided following the Protestant Reformation. Some Protestants did not feel safe in Catholic countries and vice versa. Traveling to the New World to start anew was a dangerous game, and many were willing to risk their lives for freedom and riches. England was somewhat late to the exploration game. They had sent voyages to the New World in 1584 to explore land for possible colonies. They were tired of the Spanish control of the New World because Spanish ships ruled the seas. England was willing to become a player in the game of grabbing riches from the newly discovered lands. They sought gold and silver as well. The 1584 voyage scouted the Atlantic coast of the modern-day United States, including the Outer Banks of North Carolina. That area appeared to be a perfect location for a settlement. One of the men who explored North Carolina claimed, "The soil is the most plentiful, sweet, fruitful, and wholesome of all the world." It was August 1587 when 115 English colonists arrived at Roanoke Island off the coast of North Carolina. Their goal was to establish an English settlement in the New World where the Spanish and French had not made any claims. Not long after they arrived, Virginia Dare, the first person of English descent, was born in the New World. Supplies were needed, so members of the colony sailed back to England in 1587. When they returned home, they discovered that England was at war with Spain, and the seas were way too dangerous due to war. Some ships were to stay docked in England until the fighting subsided. The colonists could not get back to Roanoke until 1590. Upon arrival, they made a horrific discovery. Their colony had vanished off the face of the earth. A clue was carved in a tree, and it read, Croatoan. It was the name of a neighboring island, and it was a good sign. Before the crew returned to England for supplies, they agreed to carve the name of a destination onto a tree in case anything serious happened. Sadly, the colonists were never found. but it is believed they integrated with the indigenous peoples that lived in the area. It was a heartbreaking end to a promising venture. Investors in England were not dismayed by the Roanoke disaster. It was December 1606 when 3 ships, the Susan Constant, the Godspeed and the Discovery, with some 100 people in total, set sail from London, England to North America. The ships were part of the Virginia Company, and they planned to search for gold and silver deposits. They also wanted to find a river that went through the New World to Asia. Those on board the ships included John Smith, a former mercenary that had been accused of planning a mutiny during the voyage. The ships arrived in the Chesapeake Bay in April 1607, and they explored the region. They found a piece of land along the James River and began unloading on May 14, 1607. Another reason they chose the location was to keep an eye out for Spanish ships in the area because they feared a possible attack. The settlement was named after King James I of England and was named at times James 40, Jamestown, and James City. It would eventually be named Jamestown. The colonists were woefully unprepared for what was going to happen next. Illness took over Jamestown after they had settled. Typhoid and dysentery ravaged the colony because water was taken from the river or a local swamp. The heat and humidity also made things difficult for the colonists to adjust to the new land. Also, some of the colonists had brought diseases with them on the journey, which impacted the entire colony. Some people brought supplies for finding gold and silver, which was nowhere to be found despite constant digging. The quest for gold was a higher priority for some of the colonists than any other task. Some of the ships went off to find the river that would lead them to the Pacific. Meanwhile, little had been done to dig a well for fresh drinking water. Also, it did not seem to be a priority to store food for the winter. Greed clouded the judgment of some, while others shook their heads in disbelief. One colonist wrote, "There was no talk, no hope, no work, but dig gold, refine gold, load gold." Those who could farm were frustrated because the area was subject to a drought that would last 6 years. 2 of the ships that brought the colonists went back to England for supplies. When the ships returned, they supplied the colony. Also, the ship brought more colonists. Sadly, one of the new colonists started a fire that did extensive damage in Jamestown in 1608. The colony could not catch a break as the colonists had to rebuild nearly everything. It was a demoralizing time in Jamestown. Hunger and illness took over Jamestown. The situation was beyond dire and there were many deaths. Only a handful of men could work at a time due to sickness and hunger. Eyes watched the colonists from a distance. It was the Algonquin, the indigenous peoples of the area. Strangers were on their land, and it did not sit well with them. The indigenous Algonquin were members of the Powhatan Confederacy. The Confederacy was named after Powhatan, a chief that ruled over 10,000 to 30,000 Algonquin-speaking peoples of the Chesapeake region of Virginia. His rule may have extended to parts of what is now Maryland. It was also rumored, although never proved, that Powhatan ordered the deaths of the English colonists from Roanoke that assimilated into indigenous tribes because Powhatan was uneasy about the invaders in his land. He only feared the worst. Somehow the 2 sides forged a friendship. The English would trade tools and other items for food with the Powhatan Confederacy. Powhatan noticed that the colonists had settled on land that was pretty much unusable, so he allowed them to settle there. Also, Powhatan requested food be sent to the colonists, since they were struggling to stay fed. It should be noted that the drought also had an impact on the Powhatan. They had little food to trade or share, but some English colonists resorted to stealing their food, which caused great tension. Although this was a kind gesture, the colonists would become dependent on the gifts of food for survival. If they didn't have to farm or hunt, then they could resume their search for gold, silver, and a river that would lead them to the Pacific Ocean. Powhatan's plan backfired. John Smith, one of the colonists, would develop a good relationship with Powhatan. It would be Smith that would motivate the colonists to work harder for survival. He had a motto of, "He that will not work shall not eat, except by sickness he be disabled." Smith wanted the colonists to be dependent and not rely upon Powhatan's people for constant assistance. By 1609, Powhatan had realized that the English were not just guests on his land. They were making a permanent settlement. He wanted them gone. There was a plan in place to get rid of them once and for all. Starving the English was the plan devised by Powhatan. If the English went out to hunt, they were to be attacked. If they were to visit a Powhatan settlement for food, then they were attacked. The English from 1609 until 1610 would experience what would be known as the starving time. Cats, dogs and horses brought over from England were eaten. Mice, rats and other animals they could safely hunt were eaten next. Some ate tree bark and shoe leather. When it became beyond desperate, some of the colonists resorted to cannibalism. It is estimated that there were some 500 colonists in the Jamestown area, before the starving time began. 80% of those people perished. Jamestown was on the verge of becoming yet another disaster of a colony for the English. A new governor arrived in 1610 and asserted himself as a leader. Jamestown had been something of a colony that lacked true discipline. A booklet of rules and regulations was published along with a new plan to deal with Powhatan. There would be no compromises, and the First Powhatan War began as nothing more than guerrilla warfare between the two sides. When the new governor arrived in 1610, there was someone on the ship who would play a role in changing Jamestown. His name was John Rolfe. The fate of Jamestown changed when Rolfe arrived. He was carrying something that would change the course of history. Rolfe had tobacco seeds with him. Tobacco was discovered in the New World and was in high demand in Europe. Rolfe wanted to make some money. Within 4 years, Rolfe was one of the wealthiest men in the area. Virginia had a cash crop, and it was basically the only crop they would grow. Rolfe would enter the life of Powhatan in the most unusual way. Powhatan's daughter, Pocahontas, was kidnapped by a colonist. The demand was the release of English prisoners held by Powhatan. Also, Powhatan was to turn over tools and weapons he had acquired from the English. Pocahontas was known to the colonists because years before, she supposedly asked Powhatan to spare the life of John Smith following his capture. Powhatan did not fulfill the deal, and Pocahontas was relocated by the colonists where she met John Rolfe. Pocahontas converted to Christianity, changed her name to Rebecca, and eventually married Rolfe with Powhatan's blessing. The marriage ended the war, and it led to 8 years of peace. But Rolfe's introduction of tobacco changed everything in Jamestown. By 1618, any person who paid their way to Virginia was given 50 acres of land. This pushed the growing of tobacco into Virginia away from Jamestown. Powhatan realized there were more colonists than he could handle. By 1618, both Pocahontas and Powhatan had died. Relations between both sides were good, and the Powhatan Confederacy was under the rule of Opchanacano, Powhatan's half-brother. An attempt was made by the English at that time to integrate the indigenous peoples into their community. This involved the people giving up their indigenous religious beliefs and cultures for a Western one. A year later, African slaves were brought to Jamestown to work on the tobacco crop. There were some 50 people brought to the colony to work, and there is little information about the people. It is unknown if any of the slaves in Jamestown were killed during the Jamestown Massacre. By 1622, Opchanacano realized that they had one final chance to rid the area of the English. He knew that the English would continue to take land from his people. They had been doing so for years, and it displaced many indigenous peoples. Opchanacano knew that the English were trying to convert his people to the ways of the English, and he saw that as a possible extinction for the Algonquin peoples. He did not want to lose the land they had. The only way to stop the English was a surprise attack. Opchanacano had developed a covert plan in 1621. He attempted to get his hands on poison. In a secret operation, they would poison the food of the English colonists and be rid of them. An indigenous person warned the English of this possible poisoning, and it was called off. Also that year, Opchanacano learned that one of his warriors had become impervious to bullets by the way of magic. That warrior would be fatally wounded by gunfire. The same warrior asked to be buried somewhere he could not be found, because he did not want Opchanacano to know how he died. Opchanacano had to develop another plan to attack the English. A surprise attack was drawn up, and it would take place on March 22nd, 1622. The Jamestown Massacre of 1622 left some 340 to 400 colonists dead. It was a massive blow to the area that had a population of some 1,200 colonists. A second war against the Powhatan was ordered, and it lasted from 1622 until 1632. One colonist wrote in 1622, "By right of war and law of nations, invade their country and destroy those who sought to destroy us." During this second war, the English found a way to destroy the food supply for the Powhatan. They reportedly destroyed a large number of crops, which greatly weakened the Powhatan. Also, more people from England arrived in Virginia, and the English soon outnumbered the Powhatan. In 1623, it was reported by a colonist, "We have slay more of them this year than hath been slay before since the beginning of the colony." Opchanacano made peace in 1632, but he was not finished with the English. In 1644, he tried again to attack the English but failed. He was captured in 1646 and killed. Virginia was made a royal colony by the English in 1624, and Jamestown served as the capital of the colony until 1699. when it was moved to Williamsburg. Jamestown lost its importance as a community as time went on. And that's a wrap on the gut-wrenching events of the Jamestown Massacre of 1622. As we journey through history, it's essential to remember the stories that have shaped our world. If this episode piqued your curiosity, don't miss our previous deep dives into Native American history. Show your support by hitting the like button, leave your thoughts in the comments below, and if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button for more episodes of Unfolding History. Stay curious, and until our next historical adventure,